This is CNN Breaking News.
Okay, you're back with CNN News Stream. More on the breaking news coming to CNN. The 3 American detainees who've been held by North Korea, they have been released. The developments coincides with that visit to Pyongyang by Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State. For details on this, we're joined by Will Ripley in Tokyo. And Will, as expected, freedom for the 3 Americans. Tell us how we found out. What more have you learned?
Well, we knew that this was going to be a quick trip by Secretary Pompeo, but this is, he didn't even spend the night. He arrived in Pyongyang after taking off from an airbase here in Japan. He had a very long day of meetings. He had a lunch where they toasted each other. They talked about what great partners the U.S. and North Korea have been in arranging this summit. And now we have confirmed from a tweet from the U.S. president that the secretary is back on the plane with those 3 Americans, Kim Dong-chol, who has been detained since October 2015, along with 2 other U.S. citizens who were detained in the spring of last year, Tony Kim and Kim Hak-song, both of them professors at the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. Kim Dong-chol was a businessman who was working back and forth in a joint industrial district near the border with China. I actually interviewed Kim Dong-chol back in early 2016, just a few months after his release, and it was back then when he, on camera, gave me a detailed confession about the espionage that he was later convicted of inside North Korea. We didn't have any way of knowing at that time whether that confession was made under duress or whether he really did do what he said that he did. We never really did get a clear sense of the charges that the other 2 men were facing because they actually have never been put on trial. Sources have told us that, well, Kim Dong-chol has been serving his sentence in a labor camp, working hard labor similar to other U.S. detainees, such as such as Kenneth Bae, for example, who served a significant amount of time in a labor camp. The other 2 may have actually been housed in some sort of a holding facility. Think of it like the equivalent of a jail as opposed to the prison as they were awaiting a trial, which never happened. But now the word that the secretary has, in fact, brought those Americans home. All signs had been pointing to that, Kristie. We know that he brought a press pool with him. The South Korean government told us today that they expected that the Americans would be released on this trip. President Trump has been hinting about it repeatedly, and it was just a matter of days ago when I spoke with an official familiar with the negotiations who told me that the release of those Americans was imminent and that, in fact, the North Koreans had decided 2 months ago to release them, but they were going back and forth with the U.S. at that time about making sure that the release of these U.S. citizens was not in any way tied to the denuclearization talks. In other words, the United States, while they consider this a gesture of goodwill ahead of this summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, they didn't want North Korea to think they're going to get any nuclear concessions as a result of it. But clearly, this is a win for the Trump administration. This is something that they set out to do, and they have now accomplished it. And apparently now we could just be hours away from learning the date and the location for this historic summit between the President of the United States and the leader of North Korea, the first time in more than 6 decades of history on the Korean Peninsula that this has ever happened, that a sitting U.S. president has met with a North Korean leader. Truly extraordinary times, Kristie.
Yeah, and the way that Donald Trump took to Twitter initially a few days ago to tease the upcoming release of these 3 Americans held in Pyongyang, and taking to Twitter right now to announce that they are indeed traveling back to the United States with Mike Pompeo. Is that something that goes down well with officials in Japan and Korea?
Well, I think that they are now accustomed to the style of President Trump. We often get a window into what he is thinking, or at least what he wants put out publicly that he is thinking through his Twitter account. This is 2018, after all, and we have learned to monitor the president's account very closely. Here in Japan, they certainly do. The South Koreans do, and I can tell you the North Koreans have learned a whole lot about Twitter over the last year and a half that President Trump has been in office. I know that there have been times that President Trump has revealed information on Twitter that has made the North Koreans uncomfortable. For example, the fact that he so quickly agreed to a summit with Kim Jong-un, and then he had the South Koreans make this big announcement after kind of teasing the press about it hours earlier. You know, that announcement on the steps of the White House certainly took the North Koreans by surprise. One, they didn't think that President Trump would agree to a summit so quickly, and 2, they didn't think it was going to be announced to the whole world before the North Koreans had a chance to let China know, for example. And that may be one one reason why we've now seen Kim Jong-un make 2 different visits to China just in the last month and a half or so. He just returned, as you know, from his second visit with Xi Jinping. He went to the Chinese city of Dalian, and they had quite a photo op, a walk along the shore, a banquet. This is China certainly trying to make sure that they remain relevant in this process. But the truly unprecedented images still to come, Kristie, when we see that summit somewhere in the world between President Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
That's right, because that really was a focus for the U.S. Secretary of State for that visit to Pyongyang. Mike Pompeo was there, yes, to secure the release of these 3 Americans who are, according to Donald Trump's tweet, in the air flying back home to the United States with Pompeo. But it was also to lay the groundwork to prepare for that upcoming historic summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. But still, in that tweet, Donald Trump is kind of teasing us again, saying that they have reached a conclusion where and when it's going to be, but we don't know the details just yet, do we?
It's been a drama that has been unfolding on social media, which I guess we should be used to in this day and age. Initially, we had heard that Singapore was a front runner, but then President Trump kind of changed the whole narrative when he tweeted that he thought the demilitarized zone, the site of that historic inter-Korean summit between President Moon Jae-in of South Korea and Kim Jong-un of North Korea, he thought that might be a good location. So then we were hearing that, in fact, the North Koreans had been convinced that the demilitarized zone and the truce village Panmunjom, that might be the place where this summit happens. But then we've been getting hints from administration officials that, in fact, the United States has convinced their president that the DMZ is not the right place, and now they're once again leaning towards Singapore. So at this point, if we're taking bets, I don't know where to put my money, Kristie. I told you several weeks ago I thought they might have it in Stockholm because Sweden has played an integral role in the release of those 3 detained Americans. I will say that I was probably really far off on that one. It seems as if they're leaning towards Singapore now. Hopefully we'll know in a few hours whether that is the case. But if you try to guess in this day and age, I think you're going to end up, like all of us, just kind of scratching our heads and waiting until the next tweet, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Will Ripley reporting live for us on this breaking news story live from Tokyo. Will, thank you so much. And once again, breaking news coming in via Donald Trump's Twitter account saying that the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has secured the release of 3 U.S. detainees that are currently up in the air on their way from Pyongyang back home to the United States. Much, much welcome news to their families who've been agonizing, just waiting for their return, the return of Kim Dong-chul, Tony